The Guns on Pegs podcast is brought to you by ITAP Group. Hello and welcome to the Guns on Pegs podcast. My name is George Brown and I'm joined as usual by Chris Horn. Hi Chris.
George, so delighted to be joined again by Matt Ridley. And in this episode, we're going to be discussing Matt's recent win in the Purdey Awards, which was a wonderful evening. And I love going to the Purdey Awards and seeing people go up on stage when they've won that moment. And then usually the head keeper who it's all come true in that point and their face says it all. I love that. Obviously, Black Grouse, the Lex, all the excitement that comes up there. So for those of you that don't know, Matt is a highly respected zoologist, journalist and popular science writer, but most importantly, he's a huge advocate for shooting and the benefits that a well-managed shooting estate can deliver for nature. Well-managed being the operative few words in that sentence. Big welcome back to Matt.
Thank you for having me on the show again.
So we had better start with a very hearty congratulations. East Carnigill, your estate in County Durham, was awarded the Purdey Gold Award. The judges described the estate as a 5-star haven for wildlife and sport. Can you tell us a bit about the estate? So how big is it, the terrain that you're working on, that sort of stuff?
It's a grouse moor. It's mostly common land, so we own the sporting rights, but not the grazing rights or the underlying land. It's managed collaboratively with the sheep farmers who graze it. About half of it is grass, white ground, and about half of it is heather. It's a productive grouse moor in a beautiful part of the world. I mean, people know about the Yorkshire Dales. They don't know about the Durham Dales, and don't tell them. But what attracted me, I've only owned it for about 8 years.
Right.
Less than 8 years, 7 years. And so I don't take full credit for what's happened there. But what attracted me to it was that it is a spectacular place for ground nesting birds, not just red grouse, but black grouse, merlins, but also waders, curlews, of course, golden plover, lapwings, peewits, as I call them, even dunlin, there's a few pairs of them, etc. So for a bird watcher such as myself, it's an enormously exciting place to be in the spring. So what I have tried to do with the help of the farmers, but particularly the gamekeepers, is to put as much effort into making sure that those birds do well as the grouse that we shoot, but acutely aware that none of that would be possible if the grouse weren't paying for the whole thing.
Yes. And so 8 years ago you took it on. Did you make big changes to the way it was being managed at that point, or over the last 8 years have you made big changes, or was it more a question of just keep doing what you've been doing? And
it's mostly a question of keep doing what we're doing, with little tweaks of emphasis. We do more winter feeding. My predecessor didn't do this, but the one before did. It had reared redlegs. We don't want to go back to that because we think that's competition for the wild birds. With more monitoring of the counting of the curlews and monitoring of what's happening to them, etc. In terms of the habitat, probably the most significant thing is that we now off-winter the sheep. And
right.
That was a condition of stewardship grants, but it's a good thing, I think, on the whole, so that there is more food left on the hill in the winter for birds. And that has meant that the heather has improved and so on. And so habitat-wise, I think we're going in the right direction. There's also been re-wetting in the terms of blocking the grips that were dug. I mean, the way I see it is that we're just undoing, with a bit of government money, the damage that was done with a lot of government money a generation ago, when the government came along and said to the uplands, dig ditches all over your hills. Well, that was a disaster.
Well, and put sheep all over them.
And then they said put too many sheep on. And then they also said put coniferous trees on. We don't have that problem. But so we've been planting trees. We've been encouraging more heather. We've been helping the birds and looking after them. but it's more of evolution than revolution.
It's great that you've been able to do this working with all the farmers as well, because often these things it's a bit of a management challenge, isn't it? Like working with people to deliver your goals. But to do it with lots of, how many sort of stakeholders, as it were, do you think you have to sort of work with?
Well, I see the farmers as vital allies for what we're trying to achieve. Because we want them to thrive, because they are the economic lifeblood of the Dale as much as, even more than we are. I mean, we bring, beaters and pickers up and money into the Dale through shooting, but they bring it through sheep farming. We're all on the same side. And it's true that occasionally there's friction. If there's overgrazing and you're losing the heather, then you can't shoot grouse. And equally, if we behave badly and frighten the sheep, that's not a good thing either. But on the whole, no, I've been very keen to see ourselves as a part of the farming landscape, that the looking after the wildlife goes hand in hand with looking after the sheep. And if we've got more curlews, then we can justify more support for the farming regime that's happening there. Because if you stopped grazing those hills, you'd get a very different habitat. You'd lose your curlews, you'd use your golden plover, etc., in short order. The whole point of these hills is that they were heavily grazed, probably by wild animals originally. They weren't very thickly forested. That turned out to be a myth, I think. And for centuries now, there has been an indigenous management system, just as indigenous as what goes on in the Amazon rainforest or the rainforest of Indonesia or something. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's important to think of it in anthropological terms as well as biological.
So you're carrying on what was already there.
Yes, with a modern twist on it in some cases,
Well, and I guess putting your sort of scientific background, the monitoring side of it, that is a part of being a scientist, is you want to know what was there to begin with and how things are changing, and you can't do that without counting things.
Well, I was rather shocked to find that most grouse moors don't know how many curlew pairs they've got. I'm not blaming them. It's very difficult to do that, but there's very little support from Natural England, even though there should be, because they say curlews are important, and then they don't come and support you trying to count them. And as you say, counting them and getting a baseline is very important. So we've tried several ways to work out how many curlews we've got without spending an absolute fortune on it. And thanks to some very helpful people from the southwest of England, we've now got a pretty good baseline number. We think we have about 100 pairs.
These are the
David Scott and his colleagues. Yeah.
Yes.
So they were here last year and they were able to do it a pretty good count. We don't think it's 100% accurate, but if there's 100 pairs and in 10 years' time there's only 50, then we know we're doing something wrong. Yeah. If in 10 years' time there's 130, then we know we're doing something right.
Absolutely. And how did everything get on over the last 12 months or so? Because it was a weird sort of a year weather-wise.
Yeah, well, 24 was a terrible year for everything. It just never stopped raining through the spring and very few things bred well. 25 was a very, very dry spring, very, very dry summer. Too dry for some species. The curlews were confused. Some of them just wouldn't lay eggs. They delayed nesting. Yeah. They eventually did, but very good for other species. So the grey partridges did very well. The wild pheasants did very well. The lapwings did pretty well because they nest early enough and it was still wet enough. The red grouse did badly because the moment when their chicks give up eating insects and start eating heather came after a very, very dry spell, and the heather had said, "Nah, I'm not going to green up.
And did you have bad heather beetle?
And we had very bad heather beetle left over from the year before in many places too. So the red grouse did really badly, but the black grouse did really well because what matters for them is dry weather in June when the chicks hatch, and plenty of insects if it's been warm enough, and there was all of that. So we think we've got another step up in the black grouse population. We'll know when we count the leks in April this year.
I couldn't believe the number that you had when we came up a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, when we were sitting there that early morning in the sort of gator, and they're just tons. They just carry on coming.
Well, that lek that you were watching first formed about 4 years ago, when 3 cocks turned up and started lekking on that track, which is rather convenient, very accessible. And the next year there were 7, and the year after that there was 14, and then last year, as you saw, there were around 20 most mornings.
Yeah.
And we've already seen over 20 this year, and it's very early in the season, so we think it'll be more than that. But we count about 7 different leks, and we had another one that got to the mid-20s, and then it started declining again. It's now down to about 14, 15 cocks. And I think what happens is that the young cocks don't like joining a big lek, because it's quite hard to be a big fish in a small pool. I mean, a small fish in a big pool, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, they do go.
So
for
they
them,
get
don't
attracted to smaller leks,
Yeah.
thinking they've got more chance of getting to be the one that does the main.
So it's like a school class size. It gets to a certain point, and then you need another set.
Exactly.
But it makes total sense, because I couldn't believe the amount of, when you saw the little chap come in, and the
He
bigger
gets bullied.
the bigger chap just goes, "Oi," you
Yeah.
know, and all of a sudden there's a fight.
Yeah.
And you know it's coming from a mile off.
Yeah.
And they try their hardest to get into the middle, and then a couple of the older boys gang up on it. And
No, the young ones are they say, "Look, this looks fun. Can I join in?" And they land in the middle of the lek, and everyone goes for them, because everyone's got his. The established cocks each has his own place, and he has a fight with his neighbour, yes, but he never trespasses. He stays within his own patch. But these ones try and can I come to the middle? No, you cannot.
Well, I want to go into more detail about lekking in particular later on when we talk about your book. I just want to keep focusing on the Purdey Awards.
Yes.
Obviously, the judges talked about the work you've been doing for waders and black grouse and grey partridge. But I think one of the things that probably tipped it in terms of the decision is the educational side of what you've been doing at East Carnigill with the Wylam Moorland Matters events, which is why Chris and I were there a little while ago. What was the motivation when you agreed to host these events?
I just want to share the experience of watching a black grouse lek, but I also want to share the experience of hearing curlews and seeing the incredible wildlife that you get on these moors in the spring. And I have a sort of passion for this fact that not enough people go to these moors in the springtime. A lot of people go in the shooting season, and there are, I was ignorant about this too. Until 15 or 20 years ago, I thought if you go to the uplands in northern England, you'll always see curlews and lapwings and golden plover. And it dawned on me when I went to the Lake District, and I didn't, that actually, no, there's large parts of the upland where you don't see any of this in the spring. And what's the difference? The difference is lack of gamekeepers. It is totally down to the control of predators, of foxes and crows in particular, and stoats. Because of that, the Pennines is absolutely heaving with these rare, important ground nesting birds in a way that other areas are not. And that seems to me a terribly important lesson that we're not getting across to people who take decisions politically, educationally, commercially. And so that was the motivation, to try and get more and more people to come and see just what a heather moorland is like in the spring, this unique habitat hardly found anywhere else in the world, which is very vulnerable, because they're all ground nesting birds, to foxes, crows and stoats.
And I mean, the Moorland Matters events are all Chatham House rules, so I'm not expecting you to name names here, but you've had some pretty serious movers and shakers up on these events, haven't you?
Well, thanks to Tarquin Millington Drake, who's a brilliant entrepreneur at this kind of thing, we've had chefs, we've had politicians, we've had journalists and writers, we've had conservationists, we've had farmers, And it's fantastic when you mix these kind of people together.
Yeah.
And we've had pushback. We've had people say, "Oh, come on, you're just
It's a smokescreen.
it's a smokescreen. You're trying to justify something that's not justifiable, etc." And I think very few people go away without having at least seen our point of view to some degree. Yeah. And it is frustrating that the powers that be, in terms of natural England and DEFRA and the bureaucrats who really run the system, who often have degrees in ecology and things, don't show much interest in sort of getting to know the farmers, getting to know the gamekeepers, seeing their point of view, and finding out how this thing works. They see it purely in terms of a sort of desk exercise, more and more, I fear. And you get these people from the bureaucracies up on the moor, and you find that that they've got a very narrow agenda about are you obeying the rules? Yes, we are, but
that's sort of beside the point.
Let's talk about going beyond just obeying the rules. Let's talk about what can you and I achieve if we try and encourage this and discourage that and so on.
It's so sad. So they see themselves as the police rather than people who are like teachers, or even not teachers, but like trying to encourage the best practice.
This is a big bugbear for me, is that it's very much about enforcement of rules. Well, I don't think that's the way to run the countryside. It should be that the Natural England guy should come into the farmhouse kitchen, meet with the farmer and the gamekeeper, and say, how do we double the curlew numbers in 10 years? Or how do we increase sphagnum moss? What are your ideas? And they would say, well, what about doing this? And he would say, no, we can't do that because it breaks a rule or something, or we can't do that because we haven't got enough money. Fair enough. But you're having the conversation. Yeah. It's never like that.
It's not goal-oriented.
It's what it is it's arse covering, right? Because if you just enforce the rules or make sure that the rules are being followed, no one can criticise you. If you fail to ensure that the rules are being followed, they can come for you. And if you try and do something imaginative and it goes wrong in some way, then they can come for you. So there's a sort of inherent, and this is inherent in all sorts of organisations where
big corporations especially.
Yeah, the safest thing to do.
You never got fired for buying an IBM.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you never got fired for not taking a decision.
Exactly.
You got fired for taking the wrong decision.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you say, look, I work for Natural England, I've talked to the guys on this moor, and I reckon the thing they should be doing is digging little ponds on the moor to help both the grouse and the wading birds have something to drink in a dry year, and doing a lot more cutting of the heather here and there, and this kind of thing. So I've encouraged them to do that, and I've got them a grant to do that. And then somebody comes along and says, "Oh yeah, but you've, we don't like that you've done that." Then they're in trouble because they've taken an initiative which has got them into trouble. That's the way they think.
This is a catastrophic cultural issue. Because how much is this affected by the political party in charge as opposed to local authority?
I don't think it's affected by the political party in charge very much, but I don't think it's local either. I think it's centralised bureaucracy that is the problem. There was a time when English nature, as it was then called, had a pretty self-sufficient bloke in your area who took his own decisions and did stuff. Now, more and more, you find they are simply being told what to do by somebody in London. Or maybe it's not London, but it's somewhere down there.
Yeah.
Who they have very little discretion. The person you're dealing with doesn't have much discretion. And that it's the blob, the bureaucracy that is the problem.
The blob,
now, at the top, you've got, under the Tories, you've got one or two ministers saying, no, come on, try and be more adaptable, try and be more positive, try and be more creative rather than just box ticking. And you get a little echo of that filtering down through the system, but not much. And then you get a Labour politician saying the opposite, try and crack down and get rid of all these people, and a little bit of that filters down and does. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, it basically doesn't move.
It's the self-sufficiency of the blob that's the problem.
And it takes a long time for cultures to change within big organisations, it takes a long time for it. You'd need a government to be in power saying be more creative, take more initiative for a really long time for it to filter down through the ranks and for that way of thinking to change.
But I mean, I can't even. I love a problem-solving question like this, but I can't even see a solution at all, because you can't. It's not like you can privatize nature recovery in a local area. So, but even if that was possible, it would then get hijacked by extremes on either side, and so that wouldn't be a good idea.
Yeah.
So it has to be run by the blob. Then what?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think go back to how these heather moorlands were created. It was a combination of sheep farmers and grouse shooters saying, "Ooh, let's try and make this nice habitat." They didn't need to be ordered to do it. They didn't need to be ordered what not to do. They got on with it. Government's track record in the uplands is terrible. I've touched on the insistence on digging ditches in the 70s, the insistence on overgrazing in the 80s, and the insistence on planting conifer trees all over the uplands, which I think is an ecological disaster. Just because you can't imagine a world in which the government's not in charge of these things, the government is not in charge of what arable farmers do on their land. There are some rules and things they can impose in exchange for subsidy schemes. Why are they so obsessed with, in a conifer forest?
It's so true.
In a conifer forest, Natural England's not interested because there's no curlews to protect. Well, because they've gone. Do you see what I mean?
It's this idea of this top-down diktat rather than letting the people. And we say this a lot, and we say this a lot on Scribehound as well, which is, why don't you let the people who know this place best work out what is best for the place that they know, and then they can come to you with their ideas, and then you can go, yes, that doesn't break any rules, rather than it being, the digging of the ditches. There's so many changes to our landscapes have been through government diktat, the grubbing up of hedges, which people are now being paid to put back in post-war or during the war, and all ploughing things up that probably should never have been ploughed up in the first place. All of these changes are top-down decisions that subsequently then have to be reversed. And
suppose you said to those who own and manage the uplands, we're going to reward you with £100 per nesting curlew, or £10 per nesting curlew, and an extra £10 if it fledges, and a bit more for a merlin, and more for a hen harrier, and something for a black grouse lek or something. And that's it. There's going to be no rules, no enforcement. You've got to prove you've got these nests and things, but we will then. I bet that would be cheaper than paying a lot of bureaucrats to enforce rules. Do you see what I mean? So it would be carrots, not sticks, but it would actually save money as well.
You are absolutely right. Can we now discuss what would happen, or why wouldn't that work? Because in that scenario, they're going to jump to the idea that, we need a referee then to make sure that they're following the rules. Or you're saying, don't worry about the rules. Because obviously, this is the danger. Because we know well, it depends.
Well,
it depends what the birds are that you're monitoring.
Farming, now there are lots of subsidies for field margins, restored hedges, and all these kind of things.
Yeah.
If you do that, but you don't kill the crows, foxes, and stoats, then you are going to attract birds to this beautiful habitat you've created, and they're going to die without ever having a child.
Yeah.
They're going to die, the opposite of orphans.
So you actually have the opposite effect.
So you're actually creating a sink.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually irresponsible not to grasp the nettle of predator control as something that also needs to be subsidised. Now, the government's already doing this for deer. It's already saying
Yeah, the irony.
we're
Exactly,
going to
yeah.
reward you for controlling deer. Why can't it also reward you for controlling foxes, crows, and stoats? It would be cheap, simple, and produce the results without a bureaucratic superstructure. And the sphagnum mosses and rare plants would benefit too, because simply in order to get these curlews breeding, etc., you'd have to do everything right and so on. Of course, it's not. There would be some side effects you'd have to worry about, but it is genuinely an opportunity. You see it happening in Africa with wildlife on. You take a cattle ranch and you turn it into a hunting ranch, and all sorts of wildlife comes back. You see it happening in North America, where Ducks Unlimited says, let's protect the prairies where these birds breed so that we have more to shoot in the winter. It doesn't have to happen through a government bureaucracy.
Yeah. So who's in charge of this currently? Is this Tony Juniper in Natural England?
Yeah, Tony Juniper is the chairman of Natural England, but Natural England is got an enormous number of employees. They spend an awful lot of time talking to each other. They're not very good at talking to farmers, gamekeepers, or land managers. They're not very good at getting out of the office, frankly, as far as I can see. And I think that's a great pity.
God, it makes me want to help try and do something about this. Because it's such a coherent argument. It's just impossible to argue with, I think. Can you argue with your own argument?
Well, the counter argument would be that Tony Juniper's a person with good motivations. He wants to do the right thing. He wants to save the world. And so do most of his people. They have good intentions. And that's absolutely true. The people in Natural England that I deal with, they want more nature. But the system that they've set up is not the best way of going about it. That's all I'm saying. An ecologist, a brilliant freelance ecologist, once said to me, when I said something in an exasperated tone about, but why isn't Natural England talking about the curlews? Why are they just going on and on about sphagnum mosses? Oh, Matt, you're an idiot. Don't you understand? Curlews don't matter. It's only carbon they care about now. And there is a horrible thing that this carbon obsession has sort of elbowed everything else aside. And, people think that by protecting carbon sequestration, they're helping other species. But I'm afraid I think it's the other way around. It's encouraging afforestation. It's encouraging people just not to think, the only way to save the curlews is to make sure that the temperature doesn't go up because climate change is threatening them. No, there are lots of other ways. There are plenty of ways in which curlews could do extremely well, even if the temperature goes up quite steeply.
So it's the choice of things they want to look after, which maybe needs to be more transparent, democratized.
Absolutely, and but also devolved, because in the end, the people on the ground with skin in the game, putting their own money at risk to either manage a moor for shooting or to manage a flock of Wensleydale sheep, they're the ones who are going to lose if it goes wrong and win if it goes right. So they're the ones getting up at 5 a.m. and going to bed after dark on a cold winter's night, etc. The chap from Friends of the Earth or Natural England, he's not putting anything at risk. So there's a reason why we in this country over the centuries went for private property as a way of incentivizing people, whether it's in business or in nature or anything. It does actually work quite well. And with grouse shooting in particular, you've got this extraordinary thing that the private sector is saying, we want to save species.
Yeah,
it's
crazy.
the only unique species of bird in the British Isles. I mean, that's true too.
Yeah.
There's no other endemic species. The pied wagtail, but it's a subspecies. The Scottish crossbill is a subspecies. The red grouse is now a recognised individual species, and therefore it's a unique bird. And here you've got, instead of, there's only 6 left, and we've got to raise a lot of money to protect them. Instead of that, we've got rich people saying, give it to us and we'll save it. Oh, and by the way, we'll save curlews and merlins and black grouse while we're at it. And you don't have to pay for it. We'll pay for it. Just let us get on with it.
I hadn't thought about it like that. But if you think about other nations that have a unique bird species, such as New Zealand, it's their entire national identity.
Exactly.
The kiwi. And yet we have a unique bird species, and actually people would sort of rather nobody spoke about it because of those icky people who like to
it's an
like to shoot
extraordinary
it.
thing. It's a remarkable thing. Now, it's quite a close cousin of the willow grouse in Europe, slightly closer cousin than the willow ptarmigan in Alaska is. So you can argue that it doesn't deserve to be called a full species, but it's way different. It's got this. It doesn't go white in winter. It doesn't have partly white plumage in summer. It doesn't have white wings. It's adapted to a country that doesn't get a lot of snow, or over the last 10,000 years hasn't had a lot of snow, and it's adapted to heather. It's got this unique digestive system that has all sorts of weird bacteria in it. There's interesting new work from Edinburgh University on this that enables it to digest heather and live off nothing but heather through the winter. I mean, it'll eat other things at other times of the year, but grouse really can't survive without heather. And that's a spectacular piece of evolutionary uniqueness that has happened just since the last ice age, because these birds obviously weren't here before the last ice age because we were connected to the continent, etc.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is sort of tied up. Well, no, it's fascinating. A lot of this is tied up with this sort of slight distaste either for privilege or for the idea of shooting and so on. And our previous guest, Eddie Norfolk, made the point that shooting needs to be seen as synonymous with nature recovery if it's going to survive.
Yeah,
and
he's absolutely right.
And this is it feels to me like this is the connection that we are failing to that we're failing to make land as an argument.
I agree.
Well, because you were in the House of Lords, you're very well connected in the corridors of power. How would your average MP think about shooting in relation to conservation? Do they even think about them in the same sentence? Do they think of conservation as being a sort of,
or are they opposing
a blanket that we try and wave to sort of justify what we do? What's the sort of general view?
Well, when the Tories won Bishop Auckland, the seat that we're in, I made a point of inviting the new MP, I'm suddenly blanking on her name, but very nice woman, for a picnic on the moor in the spring and explained what we were up to. And she got it immediately, and she was very helpful after that on a couple of occasions. When she wasn't going to stand again in 24, and it was pretty clear that Labour were going to win the seat, I got the Labour candidate out to the moor in the spring, and I made the poor chap get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and took him to a cold, draughty hide. We didn't use those vehicles in those days. And he was very good to put up with it. Sam Rushworth, he's called. And I said, look, you've probably got more moorland in your constituency than almost any other MP in England. It's a really important part of the economy. It's not a huge employer and so on, but it's a significant part of your thing, and it's very special ecologically and environmentally as well as economically. Here's my version of why I think it's a good idea. And he asked some tough questions. And he pretended he enjoyed getting up at 5 in the morning and watching these birds strut their stuff. And then there was a debate on heather burning in Westminster, And Sam Rushworth stood up and made a superb speech saying, this chap took me to a moor, made me get up early in the morning, and I saw the black grouse lekking, and it was fascinating. And frankly, they've got a point, these people. They are doing private sector conservation, and it's a good. I can't remember how he put it, but that was his argument.
Awesome.
So that was well worth doing.
Oh, well done.
And he's a very nice chap, and he's a very sensible MP, and good luck to him.
And how much do you think ideology comes into it? How much of it is just ignorance? How much of it is lobby groups sort of bending the ear, twisting the ear of people and feeding them information?
One of the things that bothers me is that there are powerful organisations in this country, of which the RSPB is the most notable one, who have a kind of vested interest here. They would like to drive down the price of moorland so they could buy more of it. And they have a terrible track record, particularly on moorland. They're quite good at defending some other habitats, but Lake Vyrnwy in Wales, they've basically extinguished the curlews and the black grouse pretty well completely now, after managing it for a number of years. And they don't want to admit that, and they are very powerful in terms of their ability to get to the media and so on. I was very struck when I attended an excellent seminar about lowland wetland birds in Kent, and there was a chap from Germany there, and he was employed by the state, whatever it is, North Rhine-Westphalia or something, to help what he calls meadow birds, which is basically curlews and godwits and ruffs and snipes and things like that. Of which they've got some very nice water meadow habitats in that part of the world that they try and manage on behalf of the birds. And he said, we have to do something about the badgers, we have to do something about the harriers, otherwise we'd have none of these birds. And I said, how do you get permission for that? Or rather, how do you get social license to do that? And he said, you just explain to them. You say, we're not going to kill every badger, but we do need to keep the numbers under control because it helps enormously. And we explained that we found 400 wader chicks in one marsh harrier nest.
Wow.
That's 400. A lot.
That is a lot.
I mean, over the season, not all at once.
Yeah, but I mean,
it's a huge figure.
And it became clear that the difference between him being able to do that and us not being able to do that was the RSPB, was the existence of an enormous behemoth of an organisation with ability to get to politicians and others very powerfully. And so I think it can be done, but we just need to win the RSPB round to birds matter more than ideology, and they don't seem to think that way.
Well, birds matter more than funding, perhaps.
Well, exactly.
Because evil grouse shooters do something evil is quite a powerful fundraising
It helps them fundraise.
technique.
But not only that, as Ian Coghill has pointed out, failure it can be rewarded in the conservation world in this country to a surprising degree.
Yeah.
The pitch for money for Lake Vyrnwy for £3 million from the EU specifically boasted about the fact that they were down to their last few pairs of black grouse and curlews. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
Can you imagine in business, it's like, we are literally about to put everyone out of a job. We've only got 50 grand of turnover because of my bad management. But do you know what I really need is another 10 million quid.
This is what Ian calls give us the money or the puffin gets us.
Yes. Exactly.
So if you would like to read more of that sort of stuff, Scrypound is the place to go. I'll get the plug in.
It's just infuriating, isn't it? You just want to bang your head against the wall.
Well, I think it's important, and I probably have made a bit of a mistake in the last 10 minutes. Nobody's evil here.
No,
people are
right.
responding to incentives, and some of the incentives are pushing people in the wrong direction in this world, and we need to sit down and start from scratch.
I don't think it came across in any other way than that, and I think that is the crucial point. I think that's clear to see that people's preferences are just badly aligned by a lack of information or a bit of manipulation.
I think one of the things that we as a community sometimes get wrong is we tend to think we're just right. So that's probably not true all 100% of the time. So what, in your view, are the big sort of blind spots or weaknesses that the shooting world needs to address?
Yes, this is a difficult one, and it's important not to antagonize people. So if you're constantly yelling at people for walking their dogs or putting up signs saying "keep out," it doesn't go down well with the public. On the moors, we have public access. Anyone can go anywhere they want. It's got a right to roam. We can close off that access for 28 days a year, which we try and do in the nesting season mainly. But it hardly matters because people stick to the paths.
Yeah.
Wading through long grass or tussocky
knee-high heather,
cotton grass or knee-high heather is no fun.
Yeah.
So people stick to the tracks anyway. And so actually that's not a problem. So you can be very welcoming to the public. And I think shooting is not always good at that. It's seen as keep out.
And what about in the public debate?
Socially, also, you touched on this, it's sort of seen as a class thing. And I do wonder if we don't dress up a bit too much. We all love dressing up, and it's very nice to get smart and not to be scruffy and just wearing jeans and T-shirts. But there's a degree to which fancy outfits put people
we
off.
should all be in camo? This could be an unpopular opinion.
No, I don't know.
But I think this was the argument during the hunting debate, wasn't it?
Oh, toss in red coat.
The red coat, but the red coat sitting on a horse looking down at someone is a super obviously the receiving end of it is a very unpowerful position to be in.
No one likes being spoken to by someone's nostrils.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just the nature of the situation. So you got to do whatever you can to try and work around that. I think it's a really interesting argument. Like if we completely change the view of it.
I think democratizing is the word I would like to use, and that partly means blurring the distinction between people who shoot and people who don't, people who wear smart clothes and people who don't. It just doesn't matter what you wear, etc., etc. But also it means smaller days of shooting that more people take part in. I just want to see more and more people who shoot grouse walked up 3 times a year, rather than a few people who do it 20 times a year.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it?
But then it doesn't always pay for itself. And,
that's the problem.
But we have a solution, Christopher.
Well, hold on, because on grouse it doesn't work because the numbers are so big.
Yeah,
and you talk about privately funded conservation, and obviously, if you can get a surplus of grouse and sell them for whatever the price is now. I mean, I made the mistake of saying in the pub the other night, well, I was doing some maths and I was like £200 a brace, and someone looked at me funny and was like, £200 a brace, mate? You're so 5 years ago. And
oh, really?
Yeah. And anyway, the point is, I think grouse has got to the point where if you need to talk about the numbers, you're doing the wrong thing. Therefore, obviously, the amount of money that's coming in pays for all this great work. So doing lots of walked up days actually undermines the argument somewhat. And therefore, managing that control is just about the most unhuman thing that could possibly happen. You're like, right, humans, no greediness, just a perfect middle line at all times. And if you could only have one drink a day and what? It's just, this is humans we're talking about.
Well, and there's a lot of conservationists who are semi-friendly to grouse shooting who say, look, of course we don't mind you shooting 10 brace in a day. It's just 200 brace feels greedy. And the answer to that is, if you're not keepering it well enough to get more than 10 brace a day, you won't even have 10 brace. You'll have nothing.
Exactly.
Yes.
This is exactly it.
But
10
if
brace
you're
is not a thing.
If you're keeping it well enough to have lots of 10 brace days, then you actually need to have 200 brace days, because otherwise you're going to crash the population. So
the balance is the bit, isn't it?
It's sort of good keepering on heather. I mean, it's such. Sorry, I keep coming back to this point. Where else do you see this incredibly unproductive habitat producing hordes of birds? I don't know of another case where there is a serious quantity of biomass of wild animals coming off a very low productivity habitat in the form of birds. It's remarkable.
Yeah, you don't.
It's unique.
But so when is too much? Because the opponents talk about grouse farming. That phrase comes up.
Well, curlew farming is the other phrase I've heard.
Yes.
Oh, classic.
Yeah.
You know, the curly is going to be He's going to be used against us soon. Going, oh, these people are all after curly. We don't like curlew anymore. That's their smokescreen for
Well,
grouse.
there is a problem that birdwatchers like rarity.
Yeah. No, this is it. Yeah. Well, this goes
Well,
back
we
to
can
your
deliver
point.
rarity.
Yeah. This goes back to your point. This is how to get £3 million for Lake Verdon. We destroy it.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yes, no, it's the same point.
I forget what my point was going to be. Yeah. When is too much? When actually things start to fall off. When all that keepering doesn't deliver the abundance that you're after, or does that not actually happen?
Well, I mean, grouse shooting is a horrible way to try and make a profit, because you are at the whim of the weather and the worm parasites and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, so you can have crashes and years where you get no money at all, etc. So nobody's going into this to make a fortune, but it is such a rare and special experience to go grouse shooting in such a beautiful environment and harvesting a delicious bird in a way that benefits the population. Doesn't benefit the one you shoot, but it benefits its cousins who don't get shot, because otherwise their numbers would crash, etc. It's very justifiable in those terms, and it's extraordinary that we're extraordinarily lucky that people from all over the world want to pay money to come and help us do this conservation. That's the way to look at it, I think.
Can you imagine if we positioned it like that? I mean, it reminds me of Sports Mutual, this business that we support, where it's a sporting club, and the thing is, shoots don't make a profit, right? And grouse moors don't make
Definitely
a profit.
don't make a profit.
No. And so you could completely reframe the whole thing, saying, right, this is the Pennines Conservation Association. And what it does is it does huge amounts of conservation. These are all the great results that we've had. And now we are doing our conservation funding days, where we will harvest grouse, and you can buy those days to help support the conservation efforts.
That's exactly what happens, but you're quite right. We never put it
Just
in
a marketing
those terms.
thing.
So we are a curlew and black grouse project, paid for by culling those beastly red grouse.
Yeah, but this is the issue.
Well, that's a great way of framing it.
No, this is it. Like, but it came out the other day when the government were talking about culling deer, and they're like, "You will be able to cull deer, but my God, don't you enjoy it?
Don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
No, you must.
That was exactly yes. You can't be seen to be having fun.
Yeah,
That's the thing.
That is a big part of the problem. Is that, so if we all look miserable while we're doing it,
Yes.
and trained marksman. The phrase the media loves is trained marksman.
Trained marksman.
Yes.
Well, what's a trained? Am I a trained marksman? I'm not very good at it, but I think I'm.
Your dog
trained.
isn't.
My dog is certainly not a very well trained marksman.
I mean, it's all. I think that's a really interesting way of framing it. You know, back to the we're all too smart. Perhaps we should, if we all wore boiler suits and looked sad, we'd be able to make the case a bit better.
On this website, when you have all these days for sale, you have lots of really unhappy people just like up too early in the morning. I've had such a hard
Really
day.
tired. Loads of 8 hungover people looking sad in the rain.
But sorry, just to add one extra point here, the teenagers that come beating on a grouse moor, I mean, the whole of the North Pennines, hundreds and hundreds of teenagers get quite a good amount of pay for a lot of exercise in beautiful fresh air and have a great day out. That's fantastic for young people in these communities where there's not much else in the way of good employment. And again, we don't talk that up enough, the social side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we move on to talk about you very quickly, what do you think about these various attempts to get UNESCO protected cultural heritage status for things like grouse shooting, hunting, that sort of thing?
Well,
do you think there's any merit to those?
I think it's worth thinking about, because I watched a television program the other day, and it was about indigenous people in southern China who were very good at managing the local forest and did things like attach little flags to hornets.
Oh,
to track down their nests and then harvest the food from the hornet nests to eat. And there's no difference between that and a sheep farmer or a gamekeeper in the Pennines. They have been in those dales for centuries.
Yeah.
Not just generations, many centuries, evolving their practices in terms of hefted sheep and grouse protection and things. And they are ecologically bedded into that land, and they are the indigenous people. They are the people who, just as much as the Navajo or the
It's this
Yanomamo
cross between
the Amazon.
The point you
so
made
why
earlier.
the heck not?
The crossover point between anthropology and ecology is perhaps one that we need to look at rather more carefully. It's really interesting.
I think it's quite hard to argue against that. Why would you? I mean, in Yellowstone recently, they had a problem, or the Yellowstone ecosystems over there had a problem with either bison or wolves. I can't remember which. And so they said to the local tribe, will you come back and do your traditional harvest of them? Well, half the local tribe lives in Los Angeles now. So they flew in and hired SUVs and went out and shot some deer. And they lit a smoke and chanted something after they'd shot this bison or this wolf or whatever it was. But the point is they were treated with respect because there was this traditional. Now, how is that any different?
Well,
Yes,
it
so
becomes culturally socially acceptable
Exactly.
if you can attach it to an ancient cultural practice or something like that. Yes.
Which is why maybe dressing up is the right way to go.
Well, but we need to
arguing against
start like tattooing babies at birth to say you're born into this sort of shooting community, and actually we identify, and then everyone just sort of grows up and then just points to something on their elbow, and then all of a sudden it's accepted.
You're going to have to develop a dance, Chris.
I'm fine with that. I don't think I should be developing any dances. I pop up bars.
Right. Before we wrap it all up, I do want to talk about your book, because we've talked a bit about black grouse already and lekking. Chris and I were very kindly invited to your book launch, and I bought your book there and loved it. It was absolutely fascinating. For those people who haven't read it yet, could you just give a very quick overview of what the book is about, and then I want to go into a little bit more detail.
Well, it's called Bird, Sex and Beauty, and it comes out in paperback next week, dirt cheap.
How about that for
And,
timing?
and the audiobook is already out there as well. And it's about the black grouse lek, this extraordinary phenomenon where the males of this species gather together in the same spot every day, beat the shit out of each other for a couple of hours, dance and strut, and then one of them gets to mate with the females, and the females choose the one they like. And it's about how that evolved, and about a long debate that happened in evolutionary biology, starting with Charles Darwin, who said, I think the females are in charge of breeding males to behave in weird and fancy ways. That's what they're doing here. Just like a chicken farmer is selecting a new breed of bantams, they're selecting a new type of male by making him gather in group, making him go through a dance, making him grow fancy feathers, because that way they want to decide which one they're choosing, and that's the system. And nobody believed Darwin. Nobody agreed with him on that. He said this is just as important a form of evolution as natural selection, but it's a very different one. No, it's not. It's just natural selection at one remove, said his enemies. And I think he was absolutely right. So there's a history of science book in my book, and there's a natural history of what happens at this lek and what fun it is to watch it and to try and interpret what's happening as well. And I had a lot of fun writing it. It's a certain amount of purple prose about the sun peeping over the horizon. And
it's a tremendous read. But I think that the fascinating thing is it feels like the debate isn't quite finished.
Correct.
Yet, that nobody's quite sure what the mechanism is. We can see what's happening, but as you said, one male gets to mate with all the females, basically.
Correct.
And nobody's still quite clear who it is who's deciding.
Yep.
Because it's all about who's in the middle of the lek.
And the females are sort of copying each other.
Yeah.
He's the one we're going for this year, right? Okay, let's all do that, which is a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, and so it's kind of crazy and kind of hard to understand exactly what's going on. So, and there's only a very small number of bird species that do lek.
Correct.
I want to come on to that in a minute.
But there's a lot of flamboyant display in many species.
And sexual selection is
so the simplest form of the argument I like best, but it's not shared by everybody, is the sexy son hypothesis, that the females are frantically worried, unconsciously, but evolutionarily, that if they mate with the wrong male, they will have a son who won't get laid.
And of course, that is true for nearly all of their sons, right? Like, how many? Yeah. What do we know? What proportion of black grouse cocks actually do?
It's been studied in Finland, and it's sort of 90% of the matings on a lek go to one male, and 8% to another, and 2% to the rest. It's that sort of ratio. On our leks, where we watch, it's usually one who dominates, but sometimes it seems. Last year it seemed to be two who were getting roughly equal shares. So there were out of about 20 on the lek.
Because the immediate thought is, if there's only one each year that's getting to pass on, you end up with quite a severe inbreeding problem after a few generations.
Because the effort of being the top cock and defending the central territory and displaying the most vigorously kills you. So you're not there next year.
Right.
So you're not going to mate with your daughters. So there is turnover in that sense. Yes, it'll be a little more inbred than a species that pairs up like red grouse, where every male gets to contribute to the next generation. But I don't. There's a bit of a sort of gamekeeper's myth that you need to shoot the old cock in the middle of the lek, so as to, because he's old and infertile.
Yeah.
I don't know what books they've been reading, but that doesn't seem to be a problem.
It's absolutely crazy, isn't it? But so fascinating.
I just find it, and I tell you what's fascinating about it is that it's wholly predictable. There's not many wildlife experiences where if you turn up at a certain time in a certain place on a certain day, you know you're going to see the bird. You know, it just isn't like that with most wildlife. But this is. You know, all 20 are going to show up every morning.
Is it every morning, irrespective of weather?
Yes. In the middle of winter, it's pretty weather dependent. But by the time you get to April, it doesn't matter what the weather is, they're all going to be there. What is less predictable is how many females will show up, because the females only show up for a few days around the time when they feel like mating. And you can have a day in April when it's vile weather and just a couple of females show up, and then the next day it's a fine day and 17 females turn up at once. I've had that happen. That was chaos.
Wow.
I bet it was.
So I'm just so fascinated by it, having seen it, but I've only seen it in the perfect conditions. So it's like, come hell or high water, the males are there. They're not going to see a female for days type thing during the winter. They'll just still do it the whole time.
Well, Emily Graham filmed the lek a couple of weeks ago in snow, and the males had frost on their backs. You know, it's a wonderful sight. And they spent most of the morning just sort of trying to keep warm, and didn't have much time for fighting or displaying. But that was because it's February. I mean,
they're still there.
When she comes back in April, they'll be displaying much more. But they have to be there, because otherwise, you know, if you miss a few days, you'll find someone has taken your space.
It's like the queue at the bar.
I was about to say, this is literally Friday night pub stuff, isn't it?
Well, it's putting your towel on the beach lounger on the beach.
But lekking sites are another really interesting thing, because I think I'm right in saying that even in places where there haven't been black grouse for a really long time, if they're reintroduced, they start lekking in the same places as they used to.
Yes, I've heard this. I don't know how true it is. I mean, I've heard that it was true in, I think it's Coverdale, where they brought them back, or
something like that,
one of the Yorkshire Dales, that they actually started lekking on the spot that the old name told you it was a lekking place, or something.
But there's nothing really that distinguishes a lekking site from any
Well,
other bit of moorland.
That's what's so surprising, is that it's not the top of the hill. It's usually a high-ish spot, or sort of halfway up a hill, but it's not the top. It's not particularly bare ground. Sometimes there's quite a lot of rushes, but it's fairly open. It's not particularly dry. It's not particularly wet, etc. And you can get leks in Finland. They often lek on frozen lakes. Well, those are obviously only temporary sites.
Yeah. That's crazy.
The
Isn't it?
distance between the leks. Talk to me about this, because if you've got 7 leks on a couple of thousand acres, did you say?
Yeah.
That seems very high density. That seems like a very high density. Because didn't you say like the number of miles between leks that grouse will fly?
Young females will disperse a long way. So they tend to leave the area and go 20, 30 miles and settle in a new area. But once they've settled, they stay there. Each lek has to be within hearing distance of the females that live in the hills around. I think they find the leks by hearing, perhaps by seeing. And we've had occasions where 2 leks have been, only 300 or 400 yards apart, but not much less than that. And occasionally you get a cock who just says, right, this is my lek and I'm displaying here, and he's there morning after morning all on his own. And I suspect he might be an old one who's got kicked out of the lek. He's no longer got the top spot, and so he's had to go and start on his own somewhere else. And who knows whether he succeeds. So the bigger the lek, the more attractive it is to females. We do know that. So it's worth joining a big lek in that sense, but it's not worth joining a big lek if your chances of getting to be the mating cock are very low. So it's an interesting equation that the males have to do.
There's so many moving parts to it all. It's just it's bonkers.
But back to your general point about the numbers and density, when I first acquired the moor, we counted 47, I think it was, cocks. We got it up to 109 a couple of years ago. It dropped a little bit last year. We think it's going to go up again this year because of a good breeding season last year. I don't know where we could get it to, but if we could get it to 200 or 300 males on our bit of ground, that would be fabulous. There's about 1,200 males in England.
That's not very many.
And about 3,000 in Scotland and about 300 in Wales. So it's about 5,000 altogether. So if we've got 100, that's not far off 10% of the English population.
Yeah.
So it's really important. And, back to my point about Natural England, there is nothing, literally nothing, in the way of incentives that I'm being given by the government through DEFRA or Natural England to protect this species.
Yeah. Crazy.
I'm perfectly happy to do it. I don't need to be paid.
Well,
to
you
do
just
it.
want to. We want recognition.
But it would, it'd be nice if they occasionally knocked on the door and said, how about we give you 500 quid per lek, so that you can have someone monitor them or do a bit of a study of them or something. Nope, nothing.
Yeah. It's a great shame. So we've already said there's a very small handful of species of birds that do lek. There's a bit in your book, and in fact, on our last morning up with you a couple of years ago, we were in the car and you were telling us all about ruffs, which
Don't get me started on ruffs.
Just the most mind-blowing species.
It's an extraordinary species.
Can you just, for Chris's benefit and for the listeners' benefit, explain as succinctly as possible, which I appreciate is quite complicated, what it is about ruffs that is so crazy?
Well, the ruff is a sandpiper. It's an average-sized sandpiper with average-sized features. It's nothing peculiar about it. It's just a perfectly ordinary sandpiper. Except suddenly in the spring, the males grow this colourful thing around their necks, which they then display like mad in these leks where a bunch of males get together and dance and play. So far, so like other species. But what's really weird is that every male ruff looks completely different from every other male ruff. Some have red ruffs, some have white ruffs, some have black ruffs, some have blue ruffs, some have barred ruffs, some have spotted ruffs, some have plain ruffs. It's like a fashion show, right? And we don't fully understand the genetics of this. Something weird is going on. But we have discovered that there is a massive mutation on chromosome 11 in the ruff that about 18% of the males have, which makes them have very, very pale ruffs. And there's two weird things about this mutation. One is it's lethal. It kills them if they have it from both parents.
Right.
But if they only get it from one parent, it doesn't kill them. Well, it ought to go extinct then. So
Yeah.
the only way it can survive must be that it has some massive other advantage. And we think we know what this is because these birds, they're called satellites. They don't defend a territory on the lek. They can go anywhere. They can display in anybody's territory. And they're mostly welcome. The territorial males say, yeah, sure, come and display in my territory because they're very attractive to females.
I see.
And when the female decides to mate, there's then a bit of a scramble. Hang on, no, this is my territory. I get to do the mate. Oh, no, too late. Sorry, etc.
Oh my goodness.
And they seem to have bigger testes. And unlike black grouse, female ruffs, which are called reeves, will mate with more than one male on every lek. They'll mate with lots of the males, or not lots, but several of the males. So there's a lot of what's called sperm competition, which means that you've got to have lots of sperm and it's got to go really fast because there's a race on.
It's just fascinating, isn't it?
And so ruffs have enormous testes compared with most birds. That's, as far as I need to go to explain the ruff. It's a really weird species.
But the really, well, I mean, it's all fascinating, but what the thing that really blew my mind is the fact that they all look different.
Yes.
Which sort of
challenges
slightly challenges the sexy sun hypothesis.
It does,
doesn't it?
It does, exactly. So, like all good biological theories, some blasted exception comes along and blows away the rule.
Yeah. It's just so
it's mad how they would how their body or whatever it is chooses that color combo at what stage in life. I mean, it's genetic, so it's chosen for them.
Yeah.
Well, unless unless something happens during the younger years.
And rather brilliantly, there's a Canadian scientist called Dov Lank who went to Finland in the 1980s and loaded up with eggs from a ruff colony and put them in sort of the right temperature containers, bought them a seat on the Air Canada flight and took them back to Canada. And he hatched them and started becoming a ruff farmer. And he soon had 400 or 500 of these birds breeding happily in captivity. So he could study their genetics and things like that. The bird doesn't live in North America, so every now and then one of theirs would escape, and the bird watchers would go crazy. The first ruff ever seen in Canada.
And then someone's out for $3 million of funding, and
exactly. Unfortunately, in the pandemic, he had to stop doing that. But a German team of molecular biologists has got interested, so they bought his ruffs off them, and they've got a colony. There's a chap in Norfolk buying some of their progeny to try and reintroduce them. There's a very few breed in Britain still, very, very few, but they used to be extremely numerous. I've got some that visit my estate in Northumberland in the autumn. We've got a marsh, which they like. I'm hoping they'll stop and breed one year, but it hasn't happened yet. But I think it's a species I would love to see a proper reintroduction program of that species in Britain.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
So if you want to know more about this and some more crazy bird mating facts, I cannot recommend the book highly enough. It's fantastic. And as you said, it's out in paperback. It'll be out in paperback when this, basically the same time this episode comes out.
There's a lot about sex in the book.
There is a lot about sex in the book.
Sex sells. So, Matt, the way that we finish off these podcasts, as I'm sure you've been briefed, is this. It's what we call desert island shooting. The scenario is that the extinction level event asteroid is going to hit tomorrow. Your affairs are in order. Loved ones and enemies are reconciled. Dogs fed. Tomatoes watered. Your last day shooting begins how?
I'm afraid it's grouse. I mean, it's got to be. There is just nothing so truly special as heading out onto the heather moors and anticipating that extraordinary moment when the horizon begins to show just birds coming towards you, and you've got wide open spaces, you've got beautiful purple heather because it's in August when the heather's in flower.
Is that the time of year you do it?
Yeah. I think they decided on 12th of August as the beginning of the grouse shooting season so that people could enjoy the heather in bloom. I can't think why they chose that date otherwise.
They'd done their bit. They got to an age and they were like, right, let's go.
Yes, I mean, it's sometimes, some years it's too early. The birds are not yet mature enough, and you have to delay shooting. September's the best time to shoot grouse, but August is very special.
You sure, not November?
Well, the days are so short in
that's the
November,
problem.
and it's often so wet and dark and that kind of thing. But
I think a good grouse season should have a day in each month.
It should. I've shot grouse on the 10th of December, which is the last day you're allowed to do it by law, and it's a pretty short day, as you can imagine.
But is there a particular moor you'd like to be on?
Well, it would have to be my own one, wouldn't it? It's
Okay. Can I phrase the question differently? You're going to do 4 drives on different boards where you're going.
Okay. Narsdale, Common Burn, Allen Heads, and Cotherstone.
Nice. Finishing off at home, back into your own lodge with your friends.
Well, this was my next question. Who are you taking with you?
Oh, do I have to answer that?
You don't have to at all. The unruly dog?
The people. Oh, yeah. Well, the good dog, not the unruly dog. So the Cocker Spaniel's coming, but the Labrador is not finding out that this is happening.
Perfect.
That day's doable, isn't it? In reality.
Yes, it is. You're quite right.
Would it be?
Would
you have to drive
too far away? But
a
some
chopper.
version of it.
You'd need the podcast helicopter, would you?
You would, yeah.
Oh, you're supplying a helicopter.
I'll fly it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We
I can
supply
stand on the end.
We supply a helicopter. If you'd wanted it, you could have had the time machine or the private jet as well. But it sounds like helicopter's all we need.
Yeah, we're on a low fuel day.
Yeah.
Oh, the time. Can I have the time machine?
Of
Yeah,
course,
go on.
yes. When do you want to go back to?
I want to go back and shoot the grouse in the north. Well, I don't want to do lots of other things like meet Shakespeare, but put that on.
Bring him with you. Go and get him.
What was red grouse numbers like when Shakespeare was about?
Probably not great, but it was a key part of the story. And we've got 17th century accounts of people going to harvest the moor cocks, etc. But obviously, with muzzle loading guns, etc. It's with the breech loading shotgun in the late 19th century that people start to really manage the moors to see if they can't get.
Well, we'll have to put Shakespeare in the time machine and bring him to you.
Yeah,
and then he can come on the day.
Yes, and when would you like to go back to do your shooting? What moment in time?
Oh, you see, I think the 1880s when grouse driving first happened, and it was considered very, very non-new when it first started. The people who loved their grouse shooting were horrified by these ghastly nouveau people who wanted to have beaters and.
Would they have been mill owners and the like?
Something like that,
yeah.
Exactly.
Isn't that fascinating?
So there was a big controversy over it.
It's just so ironic that shooting's always full of one controversy after another, and it's all some cultural twist on the last one.
Yes, one innovation is distasteful.
Innovation? Who are you?
But also the etiquette of it. There's a description that I read of grouse driving when it was new. And it describes how, get up early and, get on your horse and ride up to the first drive. And on your way into the butt, keep alert because you might get a shot.
Oh, crikey.
Imagine that.
Terrifying.
And then a covey settles in front of you. Wipe as many of them out as you can on the ground because that gets you a good score, So they weren't, some of them weren't very sporty.
Different approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming in. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, really, really brilliant. So thanks, Matt.
Thank you. I don't know how you're going to boil all that down to one podcast.
Well, stick the whole lot out in one. Done.
Uncut. Well, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Not at all. Thank you.
Right, so before we go, all that remains for me to say is there's a final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas for us to resolve, or by sharing your unpopular opinions or your forgotten drives or your podcast suggestions. Just drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read it out in the next episode or any future episodes, we will send you some garters. Chris and I will be back in a couple of weeks' time with another special guest. I'll be back with Jake Avian and Sam before that. So until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.
Very professional. Well done.